everybody today.
Yeah, hopefully.
We should just record an entire podcast just talking about pumping iron and the influence that it's had on our lives. I feel like that would be a solid usage of time.
I'm down.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, just the amount of one.
Okay, before we go to the actual topic today, at what point in your life did you actually watch Pumping Iron for the first time? How old were you? Where were you? We'll go Ryan Patrick first.
I believe it was in high school when I was doing my first bodybuilding prep. So 2004, at my house, and ordered the DVD online. And so, I don't know, you can probably stream it now from somewhere.
Yeah.
Got to be able to, right?
Yeah, yeah. But if you're a true bodybuilder, you have a copy of the DVD.
I had the 25th anniversary DVD.
Mm-hmm.
Right next to the.
I'm surprised you don't own a VHS.
Yes, that's essential as well. Yeah. It's the only encyclopedia I've ever opened in my entire life.
All right, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, I was definitely 17 years old. I watched it in my living room. I made my girlfriend watch it with me, which she actually loved. Like, I mean, everyone loves that movie. That's the thing. Like, you think it's going to be like, oh, this is just for people like lifting weights. It's not about lifting weights. Like, it's about Arnold being fucking hilarious. That's what it's about. Like, it's just Arnold's one-liners. I mean, Louis' dad. I mean, there's just so many amazing. Like, if I get started, we won't have time for the podcast. That's.
You can really sum up that movie with Arnold is enjoying life and having a fantastic time, and then everyone else is just fucking miserable.
Yes.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. All right, Lance, what you got?
Yeah, I think I was maybe 18 or 19, just out of high school, and my buddy found it, and we watched it in his basement. And the scene that got us the most was probably the pump scene, but one that I wanted to throw out there, now that you said Louis and Louis' dad, is they're benching, and Louis' like, no more, Dad, no more. Okay, one more.
And then his dad like throws the towel over his shoulders. Man, what a workout!
All right, Keiran.
Probably high school age too. I think I just remember me and a couple buddies watching it and being like, "All right, let's hit the gym now." And like, you know, we were all way too skinny going to like the huge meathead gym, and we like thought we owned the place because we were like all jacked up on like the pump conversation and stuff like that. And then we definitely weren't in the same like weight class as anybody else in there. We were just too small compared to everybody else. But that's to say, the movie gets you that hyped where you're Superman after watching it.
That's true. I was actually late to this party. I didn't watch it until I think I was 22. I was interning at Cressy at the time, actually. The first time I watched it.
See, I
think I got it from
over there.
Huh?
I knew they knew what they were doing over there.
Yeah, I think I actually got it. I think Greg Robbins was the one who gave me the DVD because like we were like just hanging out one day and they brought it up. I'm like, I'll be honest, I haven't watched that yet. And then like I was essentially given the DVD that day and I was like, do not come back here unless you have watched this.
Curriculum. This is what you're doing this semester. That makes you love Greg Robbins even more.
Yeah, I know. I love it. Well, it is fitting to talk about pumping iron because we're going to talk about muscle building today. We're going to take a bird's eye view here because I think one of the issues or problems that people run into when they're looking to build muscle is that there's no appreciation or feel for how to, if you think of it like Lego blocks, how you stack training together progressively so that you continue to make progress and build muscle. Because I think a lot of people, like if you're pulling stuff off of bodybuilding.com, T Nation, whatever it is, you're probably stuck sending the same signal over and over and over again, right? Like you're probably just like living in mechanical tension world all the time. But when it comes to hypertrophy, there are lots of ways that we can accomplish this goal. And it's important to cycle and phase through training. I like the Lego block analogy personally. So that we're giving you different inputs, and each input and each phase of training builds on the previous one, so that we can kind of like run you through this phase and then bring you back towards the beginning and kind of run that again. right? And so we'll zoom out and give a bird's eye view of how to potentially stack together these, what we would call training blocks. There's so many different languages for these, right? Like a training cycle, a training block, whatever it is, a period of training where we're going to focus on a particular input to drive an adaptation. And then we'll go to the next phase, right? So we'll zoom out and look at what that looks like from a hypertrophy muscle building standpoint to try to give people direction with regards to like where to start and what order of operations potentially makes the most sense. So, Mr. Wilson, I will kick to you first if you can maybe give us an overview of what that looks like schematically.
All right. So in regular Mr. Wilson form, I'm going to start with a few caveats, of course, and just first say that you don't necessarily need to periodize hypertrophy training, and even if you're not doing you're kind of always periodizing hypertrophy training, whether you realize it or not. Like if you're changing your rep ranges, if you're changing your exercise, that could be considered some form of periodization. So you're always kind of doing it, but you don't necessarily need to have different blocks. I just think it's better. I think it makes a lot more sense. I see it make things move a little bit better. I think there's a lot of reasons to do it, which we'll kind of get into. So I just want to begin with that because, immediately there's going to be somebody who's like, well, Ronnie Coleman never did a work capacity cycle. So I'm like, yeah, I get it. Okay. But this is what I've found to be really useful. And there's reasons why that may be the case. Yeah, and here's why. So the way that I like to think of hypertrophy training is I almost want to start with like what I think is going to be the worst thing for hypertrophy. And I think that the worst thing for hypertrophy, while still actually getting some hypertrophy potentially and getting some body composition changes, would be these like big systemic type of circuits where the limiter is really going to be more central. It's going to be the heart. It's going to be the brain. So think like if you're familiar with the 30-30 type of workouts, the 20-40 workouts, where you have these big bang exercises. You're doing it on a time-restricted in a time-restricted way. The loads are not super, super heavy. And really the thing that's making you want to stop is the fact that you're going to vomit all over yourself and then fall asleep in it. Like that's it's not so much like the local tissue that's fatiguing necessarily, but there's enough mechanical tension, especially for someone who's just starting out, and there's enough local metabolic stress that they're probably going to get some amount of hypertrophy out of that. Now, that's one benefit. I don't even think that that's the main benefits of doing it. I think the main benefits of doing it is that you build this like we call it this work capacity to be able to handle the subsequent training cycles at a really high efficiency. And that doesn't mean just be able to do a ton of volume for the sake of doing a ton of volume. It means being able to stay in a set mentally when things start getting hard. When you're doing a leg press, for example, when it starts to suck really bad, you have that reference of like, well, this isn't as bad as those fucking 30-30s that I was doing for the last 4 weeks. And I have the capacity to be able to send blood out to the periphery and be able to pull old blood back out and be able to continue to produce really high quality contractions because of that. So I think that even for someone who's on the more advanced side, which, I'm more on the advanced side of bodybuilding at this point. I've been doing it for 21 years. I put on a significant amount of muscle. I still use these type of training cycles to help me to potentiate the following. Now that doesn't it's probably not something you find in the literature, but that is mechanistically why I think that those types of cycles are important. Does anyone want to comment on that? Do you want to kind of take it from there first before I go off on a diatribe for 30 minutes about the kind of subsequent cycles?
No, I agree. Yeah. So just to clarify for folks, we're talking we're going to start with a work capacity training block or training cycle. Traditionally, it's going to look something like circuit-based training, so probably not very traditional bodybuilding-esque stuff, right? But we're setting the stage for the things to come. We're making you more resilient, increasing work capacity, giving you the ability to actually do more work, sit in sets and suffer a little bit longer. So it's an important first step as we move into the later phases of training.
Yeah.
Anybody else is welcome to chime in here if they want, or we can let Ryan just continue on with the train of consciousness.
Well, so and that, for someone who's just starting out, like I like to start them with somewhere between like a 5 and 6 week cycle like that, or maybe like a 4 to 6 week cycle. I think that's plenty of time to get the adaptations that we're looking for in that period of time. And during that period of time, we'll do something like beforehand, we'll do a 10-minute bike test, which everybody loves, and we'll see that thing go up because aerobically they should be getting a lot better. And again, their brain should be getting better at just handling those high RPEs. So we should see a nice increase in those types of adaptations. And I'll usually do some type of like circuit too, like a big circuit that just, they can have that as a reference. Like, wow, I got a lot better. From there, I like to go into something that looks a little bit more traditional bodybuilding. Like it's going to probably be more of an upper-lower split. We're going to utilize straight sets, so no more circuits, which is always a nice relief after, at least on paper. And then when you start doing it, you're like, oh, wow, this still sucks. It's still really hard. But a big key here is that the reps are going to be a little bit higher relative to like a traditional hypertrophy cycle. So it's probably going to be somewhere within like the 12 to 20 rep range. And the other big key is that the rest periods are going to be short. So we're using straight sets, higher reps, short rest periods. So essentially what we're doing is at the local level, we're functioning in a hypoxic kind of environment. So by the time you finish that set, anytime that you contract a muscle really hard, you're going to squeeze off blood flow to that muscle. So in a sense, you're doing some degree of blood flow restriction training. Refer back to our podcast number. I have no idea, and check that out. But you're always doing some amount of that during training. When you're doing these short rest periods and straight sets on top of that, you're not really allowing a ton of time for that for those metabolites to clear out that are associated with muscular contraction. And in doing so, you're going to have to recruit higher threshold motor units because those other ones are starting to fatigue. So it's a way of being able to recruit more motor units, more muscle, and fatigue and stimulate more fibers without using as much load, which I think is really beneficial. Now, is it the best form of hypertrophy training? I don't think so, but it's good enough, and it's better than what they were just previously doing, where they got some hypertrophy out of that, hopefully, and now we're going to get a little bit more. Again, we're still building this resilience in that those sets do suck. Like by the time you get to that last set, maybe it's 4 sets, you're probably not hitting the same number of reps that you were previously. You're probably hitting pretty close to failure, or you should be at least. And it's just building some tolerance. And like just that, like the pump itself not only feels amazing, as we all know, as you'll come to find if you watch Pumping Iron, but it also in itself is kind of a hypertrophic stimulus. Like as we as blood rushes back in, like that shearing force of just the blood going back in can stimulate some of these what's the word I'm like, these mechanotransduction type of signals. So that would be like phase 2, and we would run that for 4 to 8 weeks potentially. I think as you get more advanced, these windows become a little bit smaller for the first 2 cycles, and then you would get more into now you're set up really well. Your tissue tolerance should be really high. Your aerobic system should be in a really good place. Your local buffering capacity should be very high, and now you're at a place where this mechanical tension work, you're well ready for it. You're able to tolerate it, and it's probably time for a change anyway, psychologically. And then that ends up being more of your like traditional mechanical tension model, which you can do in a variety of ways.
Beautiful. So I think a word that I'll pull out here is patience, maybe. I think that a lot of times people are in such a rush to try to build muscle. It's like we chase a very short-term gain without realizing that if we just had an inkling of patience and allowed ourselves to think on the time scale of like 4, 5, and 6 months, you would be significantly better off if you do it this way as opposed to potentially this other way, right? It's just we see like results in 4 to 6 or 8 weeks, and then we plateau and stop making progress, as opposed to like maybe taking slightly less results in that 4 to 8 week period, but never stop making progress. So when you get to 6 months, you're like an order of magnitude better than you were previously. That's kind of one of the things I'm noticing here in the conversation of how we're stacking these things together.
Yeah, it's always long term. I'm always thinking long term. Like, I think anyone can get results in a short period of time, just like weight loss. It's like we can make you lose 10 pounds in 2 weeks. That's easy. Are you going to sustain that? Are you going to be able to repeat that? That to me is a lot more important.
Lance, I think you had a thought.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Ryan, are you having people in a caloric surplus this whole time? Like, are they fully chasing muscle gain?
Yeah, really good question. I think the first phase, I think it's kind of a waste to try to
do that.
To do that, yeah, because I think that work capacity.
I was wondering that.
Yeah, like, and that's a great question, because there's a cap to how long you can eat that much. So if you're doing that, for one, that work capacity cycle actually works really well with a lower caloric intake. And I could throw out some signaling stuff that I'm not going to say because James will lose his mind, and I don't believe in it either. But there's some simple stories about, like, AMPK versus mTOR and that kind of thing. But I think that there's, the signaling in itself is not necessarily a good conversation, but the idea of it being working together, like low caloric intake, increase in aerobic capacity, those things work pretty well together. And James can speak more to that than myself, I think. But is that fair to say that, James? Like, just on a broad spectrum?
It makes sense, I think.
Yeah, especially if you're talking about muscle building. Like, Aaron and I actually just recorded a podcast before this talking about nutrition strategies for like weight loss and weight gain and what to do when you get stuck. And yeah, I think in that aerobic realm, since you're going to be utilizing far more of fat essentially as an energy source, like the conversation is slightly different there, right?
Yeah, you're just not going for that at that time.
Yeah, like muscle building is it's a protein and carb conversation through and through, right? Like, if you just want to jack up endurance and go like run marathons and ultras, like it's going to be more of a fat conversation because that's going to be the biggest thing that you're going to continue to tap into and use, right? So yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Yeah, and like you're it's not even really like driving the adaptation anyway. So at that point, I'm not going to waste my ability to eat on that. Now, the next phase, that like local metabolic phase or peripheral buffering or whatever fancy terminology you want to use, it's the pump cycle. That to me makes a lot of sense to drive carbohydrates up as high as possible, specifically carbohydrates, because I think one of the major adaptations that we're getting, I mean, think about the type of training that we're doing. It's largely like deoxygenation kind of driven, which means that by nature it's going to be more glycolytic. We're going to be using more carbohydrates. So in theory, we should be creating this kind of sugar flux where if we put a lot of carbohydrate in, we should be able to store more of that carbohydrate. And you'll kind of see that immediately. Like, you have a ton of carbohydrate like the day before you do that type of workout, the pump you get is far better than you would normally get. And your muscles are literally bigger. Like, you're literally storing more glycogen and the associated fluid in that tissue. So it makes sense in my mind to try to drive carbohydrate as high as possible, along with a caloric surplus. It doesn't mean that you go crazy and try to drop your fat super low. I don't see any reason to do that. I'm always thinking, like, if we're trying to build muscle, like I'd rather just be more aggressive and gain some body fat and not worry about it. But specifically during that phase, I want high carbohydrates. And then when it comes to mechanical tension, I still am probably going to be more biased towards carbohydrates, because I think that's always part of we can get into like the sarcoplasmic versus myofibrillar kind of conversation. But I think that it's always going to be useful. Just, it seems like athletes in general just tend to do better with more carbohydrates. Like, it just makes more sense in most cases. But at that point, during that mechanical tension phase, it might be nice to take a break from eating 600 grams of carbohydrates every day, and maybe you jack your fat up a little bit and bring your carbs down, because you're not utilizing them as much. It's not as much a part of the adaptation.
Yeah. Once you move into that mechanical tension phase, are you still looking at, straight sets, upper lower split, and we're just giving you more rest time essentially between sets? Is that going to be like the biggest differentiator from phase 2 to phase 3?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably where I would start for most people, but not necessarily. Like you at that point in time, you have a lot of play. You can do a lot of different things at that point. Like a lot of times those will be like more full body in nature, where maybe I'm not necessarily doing like 4 days a week of the same body part, or maybe I am. But it allows me to do things like antagonist paired supersets, or just non-competing supersets, just for time efficiency, where I'm getting like I can do a lower body and an upper body exercise on the same day, which is nice because it kind of forces me to rest, especially coming after those other 2 cycles, because people get kind of like antsy. You're like, I can't sit around for 3 full minutes or 4 minutes in between sets. Like that's just so weird. But it allows them to get the local recovery while they still have really high quality work. So a lot of times those will be full body workouts, or if they are upper lower, a lot of times I'll superset the upper body workouts, and then the lower body, usually easier to take more time in between lower body sets because they're just more taxing.
Got it. Yeah. So how often do you like to cycle back and hit that phase 1 and phase 2, where we have the work capacity phase and then more like a local metabolic stress phase, and then we kind of have like the big world of mechanical tension, where we just open up Pandora's box of like all the different options of how to attack that? But those first 2 phases in particular, how often do you like to kind of cycle back and like throw those in for folks?
Yeah, it's of course like one of these it depends kind of things, but there's a few things that it depends on. I would say, like, I don't think there's ever going to be a situation where I'm going to do less than like 8 weeks of mechanical tension, unless there's a specific reason, like their body's starting to hurt, like there's something, they get injured, they can't eat anymore. Like, honestly, a lot of it gets driven just by like the behavioral nutrition stuff, where it's like, all right, it's been 12 weeks of me eating a ton of food. I need like a break from eating. So at that point, I may say like, all right, well, let's just do 1 week of like this work capacity cycle thing, and then 1 week of this local buffering thing. And during those periods, we're going to have a little bit less food coming in, just to kind of re-spark that appetite, and then go right back into mechanical tension. So that might be a strategy. But typically it ends up being like often 4 weeks or so of like the local metabolic, and then somewhere between like 8 to 16 weeks, usually more like 12 to 16 weeks of the mechanical tension stuff, and then maybe like a couple of weeks of that systemic metabolic once they've run through that, like the initial 4 to 6 week phase of that. Because the cool thing is with like those first 2 phases, like once you've done them, it's almost like there's some type of memory there where it happens really fast. The adaptations come back really quickly, where I don't think you need to run like another 6 week work capacity cycle like every 4 to 6 months or something like that. I think you can get it in like a week or 2 a lot of times, and in terms of what we're looking for. So, but yeah, generally I would say it's usually going to be like in total, like usually by like 16 weeks, people are needing a little bit of a change, depending on what you're doing.
Excellent. Beautiful. No, that was good. Yeah, I think that gives a really good roadmap for folks when we're thinking about order of operations and then how long each of these phases last. So hopefully people listened and took a few notes. And if not, the beautiful thing about a podcast, you can rewind it. Pro tip. And write it down as you listen.
Faster, so you don't have to listen to me for as long.
That's true.
Yeah.
Anybody else have thoughts here? I thought that Ryan did a really good job laying that out sequentially. I don't really have a whole bunch to add here that wouldn't just be repeating what he has already said. Keiran?
The thing I was thinking was just, sorry, real quick. The thing I was thinking, just because, we all talk over Keiran, apparently. The thing I was thinking was, the only thing I could do to mess this up is to say something. If Ryan's going to just spill all this, let's just let him go.
Yeah, for real, right? Like, just, that's good. I guess my question is, because I know you're one of the few bodybuilders I know who will actually hit, like, a dedicated and hard like strength block. Where do you find utility in that in everybody, or is that just because you enjoy competing? And like, what are your thoughts on throwing a strength block in the mix there every once in a while?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like that's something that I've gotten like further away from over time, because it just seems to introduce more risk than a lot of bodybuilders are willing to take. Like I think you can make an argument for doing it. It's just going to look a little bit different. The reason I do is because I compete in powerlifting, so obviously like that makes sense. And I think before I definitely thought there was like a benefit to doing that. Like it was going to also potentiate the hypertrophy effects. I don't know that that's necessarily the case, mostly because for powerlifting, like if you're going to do it for powerlifting, it's like those lifts are kind of a lot different than the hypertrophy lifts anyway. So it's like a low bar back squat doesn't necessarily correlate to like your high bar squat that you would be doing for hypertrophy. You could make the argument that like just having that load on your back, like just makes you more tolerant and more resilient to just the mental aspect of having heavier weights on your back. So you could make that argument, but there's just more risk involved. Now, I think where it could be beneficial, and I don't always do this, but is you could throw in like, so even during the mechanical tension phase, like you could have some lower rep work in there for like a hack squat or something. And a lot of times that will help to get things moving again. And there's no reason why you couldn't do that as like a 4-week phase where it's going to be like more lower rep work, but there's still always going to be like some higher rep work. Even during a powerlifting prep, like I believe that there should still be enough accessory work in there just to keep you healthy and to maintain tissue. So if I'm going to do like a strength phase, it's going to be like, yeah, we'll hit some, maybe we'll hit some 5s and maybe work down to some 3s in those hypertrophy lifts that make sense. But it's not going to look like a super traditional strength block in a lot of ways. But I don't know, like, what do you guys think about that? Like, do you think there is like a potentiation effect potentially with that?
Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, probably. I think that is one of the reasons that we talk about periodization, because the strength stimulus can maybe raise your 100%, raise your ceiling so that everything else is a little easier. And maybe I can, maybe even if I don't use heavier weights, maybe that will help me stick with the same weight for all 4 sets, for example. But yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I think you can make that argument.
I would also say there's this lecture with Charlie Francis. I can't remember the name of it, but he's talking about Ben Johnson running, and he's like, that dude squatted 545 for 6. We don't need to give him any more strength. And I would think that in the context of bodybuilding, sets of 6 is maybe strength enough.
Yeah, I was going to agree with that. I think it potentially depends on the athlete standing in front of you. Are they earlier in their training career to where they just don't have a large strength base to draw from, right? But I think that the thought process there, right, in a whiteboard world, if you play the thought experiment, as Lance mentioned, is I do think that there is validity to getting stronger so you can move more load and get more out of a mechanical tension phase. I think that it's probably like one of those things that there's some threshold that exists here to like, we need to get you strong enough so that we can actually get a large enough stimulus on the bar to make this mechanical tension worth it to really move things forward for you. But there is probably some level of diminishing returns at some point. Like, okay, like, is getting you significantly stronger in like a double or a triple really going to help us when we start coming back to more of our like muscle building hypertrophy world stuff? You could probably make the argument either way. Like, I don't think that increasing your strength pool is going to hurt you in any way when it comes to this, right? Like, it's not going to decrease your ability during a mechanical tension type phase of training. I think you can look at a guy like Stan Efferding, who I think is probably like balanced that world quite well over time between powerlifting and bodybuilding and doing both. But yeah, in my mind, it probably comes back to, is the person in front of us strong enough to move enough load to build muscle when we get into these other phases of training? So it probably depends a little bit. But yeah, I think hypothetically, it would make sense that if we can get you stronger to increase the strength pool to give you the ability to move more load, that would probably help us in different phases of training where we're trying to drive more muscle building and hypertrophy.
I would say I just wanted to echo, because I think we're kind of going against what you had said earlier, but I think, Ryan, the way you presented it is more correct. Like, I think doing those strength blocks for most people is probably too risky in a lot of situations, or like unnecessarily risky, right? Like, I don't really think I might do 4 weeks of it, but I don't think anything more than that of strength work is really worth your time, because at least with the people that I train, who are not always the most athletic, i.e. myself, you get setbacks really easily with stuff like that just because of the stiffness that comes with it.
I would think maybe it'd be helpful also when we're talking about a strength block, maybe we define what that actually looks like for folks. So are we talking training to hit heavy singles and doubles? Or
I would say training to hit less than 6.
Okay, yeah, because 5 is kind of the threshold for me on the bottom of that.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm very comfortable working on 5, 6 plus. I think once we start getting below 5 is where things get a little bit, the risk associated with that I think starts to get a little bit higher, right? So that's probably going to be helpful from a qualification standpoint. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just gonna say, and even if we're not doing it like with this in mind, like the hypertrophic stimulus is starting to drop off at that point, just because like the time under tension is very low. So yeah, that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, because I was just gonna say, like building up a 5 rep max, you have gotten stronger. We've improved your strength capacity. Now, whether or not you have the skill to display that with a better 1 rep max is a different conversation, because that's going to be very neural in nature and it's very skill based. But yeah, I think for me and like the people that I work with in the Rebel family, the number I'm always looking to improve is I want to see that 4 to 6 rep max improving. That to me, I think is like the best overall snapshot picture we can get for somebody of like, oh, this person is definitely getting stronger. Like your 4 rep, 5 rep, or 6 rep max has gone up. That's usually the one that I chase, because when we start getting into triples, doubles, and singles, it becomes incredibly technical. Risk goes up really high. And I'm like, well, if your 5 rep max continues to go up, you are getting stronger. And like, that's what we want to see. Right. So I think, I don't know, maybe I'm just talking myself in circles here. So I'll pass this off to someone else that wants to jump in. Or not, or no one has thoughts, and we can move on from this topic. So in summary, useful to chase some strength gains here, but when we're talking strength gains, we're probably talking 5 rep and up. We're not talking singles, doubles, triples.
Yeah, I think like your point about like who's in front of you is really important too, because there are times where I've used that as, maybe not necessarily like I programmed it as a strength cycle, but it's like, I really think you need to get stronger. Like you're just so like abysmally weak that like I think that needs to be the focus. So we need to find some way to drive things up. Whether like one thing I really like using is like potentiation singles, where it's essentially just like go a little bit heavier over your last warm-ups or what your working weight is going to be, and just do a single there. It's going to be super easy, but each week just bump that up just to get that exposure to heavier loads, because I think some people do freak out under heavier loads. And I know there's definitely been like there was at least one study where they had people do that, and they got significantly more reps in the group that did that potentiation single. So in the acute sense, it seems like they are able to produce more work, which should be a good thing for hypertrophy. And I think it's probably just from that exposure, just the heavier loading, and then just creating some neural connections there, and just not bitching out essentially. So like there are times where it's like, yeah, I think this person needs more strength work, but I might not necessarily program it as like a strength cycle. And I'm just going to kind of try to bake that into the training as it is. And then there's other times where it's like, I actually am afraid to give you more strength work because you're so fucking strong. Like I think of something like Ethan Grossman. It's like, that is a huge risk for him. Like for him to do like even like anything under 8 reps, It's like he's just too damn strong. Like it takes too long to. There's not even damn weights at this gym for him. It's like it's just there's a lot of reasons why it wouldn't make sense. So I think it really is context and individual dependent for sure.
Excellent. I love it. All right. Anybody else? Any departing thoughts here for the listeners, or any follow-up questions on this? I thought that was pretty good. Ryan did a good job running the show today.
No, it was great. I think it'd be interesting to dive into some of the specific methods in a future episode with him. But yeah, no, that was great. I always learn something when you're talking about hypertrophy, so I appreciate that.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, I said that would be like another conversation for sure. Like, because there's definitely some things we can get into that are that we didn't really touch on today, but
At least another 45 minutes, right?
Talk as long as anyone will let me.
Cut them off. I was going to say maybe a good, just for my learning, to give a recap of what you told us about the whole, the whole point of this was, okay, we're starting with some sort of like volume endurance block and your example was a 30-30 or a 20-40, kind of like this centrally really sucks. It makes me want to throw up kind of stuff, where you're not really pushing the diet so much because it's a fool's errand. You got enough to worry about. After that, you run into the pump phase, 12 to 20 reps, where you're purposefully not resting completely. And then after that, you're transitioning more towards a mechanical tension kind of thing, where I'm assuming you're working from 12s and down to maybe 6s, with also having, I know you said this later on, but accessory work that's in a higher rep range just to keep your body liking what you're doing.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Excellent.
Yeah, when I talk, that's so nice.
I had to write it down.
Appreciate that a lot. That's cool. That's perfect. Yeah.
I like it. So anybody listening, you can just fast forward to minute 36, and you'll get the episode in about 30 seconds. So maybe time mark that one.
Put that in the front end.
Yeah, we'll just put it as the intro, and then it'll be like, oh, fuck that, listen to this whole thing.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hope you guys have a fantastic week. If you have questions on this, always just pop on over to Instagram, shoot us a DM, not a DM, a DM. Happy to kind of help out, answer questions any way we can.
Not my Instagram, though.
Yeah. Just go to the Rebel Instagram, because if you can message
a lot faster.
You can message Ryan. You just will never get a response. All right. That's it. Have a great week, folks. Thank you for tuning in.